The two largest economies in West Africa has chosen their leaders. These men are expected to have the technical skills to revitalize their economies, combat inflation, food insecurity, terrorism, and so on. Let's go through their pre-election interviews to see who amongst these two countries has the advantage of leadership.
Thank you very much for talking to the BBC. First of all, how are things going with you with the campaigning?
Things are going very well. I'm very, very confident and that this election, free and fair, I'm the front runner. And that is why I'm getting many arrows.
We'll talk about one or two of the arrows in a bit. Let's talk about your priorities. If you do win the elections in February and you're sworn into office come May 29th, what are your priorities?
Security and economic recovery to accelerated development, to get Nigeria employed and get inflation down. Monetary policy needs to be changed. Subsidy needs to be decided upon and removed.
Security is a big problem for many Nigerians. And I remember in this very room in 2015, I asked President Muhammadu Buhari when he was campaigning about that issue. And he said, well, we know what we're going to do. We know what we're going to do. The problem still persists. What are you going to do specifically?
It actually reduced. I would defend him for that. Then 17 local governments and about 4 states where we have flags of foreign jihadists in Nigeria. That is no more. That is long gone. To start a chaos is easy. To bring normalcy and redecorate is more difficult. Here we are, barriers degraded, but not completely eliminated as worth. Then we talk briefly of lethal weapons and ammunition and technology equipment that could help accelerate the cleanup of those people. The West is yet to feel comfortable enough with the Buhari administration to sell us the arms.
Do you think that will change? That might change with you, or will that change with you?
It could change. It might not change. But we have to look at, alternatives. And those are the mass recruitment of individuals in a volunteer army to really clean up.
So, more people in your military forces, security forces, so to speak, as you said during your speech downstairs. Now, I just want to move away from that because I realize we don't have much time. There's also the issue of Nigerians have lived under this Buhari administration for 8 years now, almost 8 years. Some would say this 8 years has come with a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. You are coming from the same perspective as President Muhammadu Buhari, and you're members of the same political party. You helped bring him in to office nearly 8 years ago. What are you going to do different? Why should Nigerians be voting for you?
Because I'm different. I am Bola Ahmed Tinubu. I have governed Lagos. I've built a model state that could be a country on its own. I've led an administration that is so prudent. From 600 million internally generated revenue to 5 billion a month. That's a record. Nobody else can brag about that. I've treated and tamed the Atlantic Ocean surge in Nigeria that will have perished many people in Lagos. The infrastructural renewal of Lagos is excellent. I've continuity in Lagos. Buhari has done his best. I can't run away from him being my friend, my leader in the party. I will not.
Okay, sir. I mean, when you talk about money generated in Lagos, and I want to come to your own personal self. When you talk about, you're a very wealthy man.
How do you know?
Well, you know, I mean,
you are not my accountant.
I'm not in your account, but this is speculation, and it's fine. You can actually rebut it or not. When I look at some publications and they say they're worth 4 billion, some is even more than that, but you refuse to explain where your wealth comes from. I know where you live in Lagos. It's a massive, sprawling mansion that takes up nearly a quarter of a street in a very expensive suburb. Why do you refuse? I mean, don't Nigerians have the right to know where the wealth of their next leader comes from?
Because they got to know how to analyze and how to ask questions, not in the accusatory format. Are they enemy of wealth? If they are not enemy of wealth, investment do yield. I have an example of a Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the country, in America and in the world. He started from stock buying and brokerages. I inherited great real estate. I turned the values around. I'm not denying my wealth. I've not been, I was the most investigated, the most accused governor in the opposition up to, from for 8 years and up to 2007. And since I left the office, I'm still there. I've not taken any government appointment, no government contract.
Yes, but some say the legacy you left in Lagos State was that, you were getting a share of the revenue that Lagos State was generating.
Hey, excuse me, share what? Have they proven it? The World Bank has, IMF has investigated the record in Lagos. What's wrong with them?
And I want to move away from that.
It's envy.
I think you've kind of explained that, and we don't have much time. If you were not running for president, sir, you have two main opposition candidates, Abubakar Atiku and Peter Obi, who people are saying, he's the young upstart, and I mean that in a very positive way.
Young where?
Young upstart.
Have they been governor of Anambra 8 years?
Anyway, Your Excellency, if you weren't running for president, which of your two major opponents would you be voting for?
None.
Why not?
Because they are not as competent as any other person out there. They have no track record. None of them is qualified except me.
I wonder if we can start with you saying that Ghana needs an urgent reset. Why do you think that is? What does it need?
Yeah, well, when you use your phone and it gets frozen, what do? You reset it, you restart it. And so we need a restart. I mean, we've hit a dead end. Our economy is in crisis. And everything else has a linkage to the economy. Inflation is up. We have a depreciating currency. And our whole macroeconomic framework is unbalanced. And so we need urgent fiscal reforms, but not only in the sphere of the economy, but even in governance.
Well, let's talk about the economy and inflation in particular, because that's something that people are really going to be noticing in their pockets. Cost of living gone up enormously. How are you planning to address that?
The cost of inflation was the heavy borrowing government did from the central bank. In a space of 2 years, they borrowed in excess of 70 billion cedis, and that is what drove inflation up. I remember that in our final year in office in 2016, we did zero central bank financing. And so it meant that we financed the budget from our own resources. And so we need to go back to that. Already in the IMF program, the program has stopped central bank financing. So that's a good start. But we need to undertake some fiscal reforms, bring down expenditure, and increase revenues. Not increase revenues by just adding additional taxes, but looking at non-tax revenues, smart borrowing, so that we don't continue to increase the public debt. And so we can set up debt escrows, do BOTs for infrastructure. I think that a combination of all that would make things much better.
So how are you going to increase revenues? How is Ghana going to grow while reducing this debt burden?
Well, one thing everybody says is extend the tax net to cover more people. And I think that it is possible to do that. There's a whole huge informal sector that is paying no taxes. I mean, there are all kinds of professionals, artisans and things who are getting paid every day and they don't contribute their quota to the taxes. So we'll find smart ways of getting them into the tax. That's the first one. And then the second one is to cut government expenditure. I mean, at a point, this government had 125 ministers, and I mean, that clearly is excessive. Even now, they have 87 ministers. And so we have promised that we're going to cut that down to 60 ministers. We're going to cut down the number of political appointees. I mean, when you do that, you're cutting down the number of houses you have to provide for these appointees. You're cutting down the number of vehicles you have to buy for them. You're cutting down the amount of fuel they have to use. You're cutting down the electricity and utility bills that you normally provide for such people. And so government must show by itself that it is prepared to cut expenditure before it calls on other people to make sacrifices. So cutting expenditure is one of the things. Then eliminating waste is another. There's a lot of waste in the government sector. For instance, every year we have the Auditor General's report, and it shows that we lose anything between 13 and 15 billion cedis every year to malfeasance and malpractices. And so one of the things we want to do is the fight against corruption, get special courts to try people who are indicted in the Auditor General's report so that it can be a deterrent to others not to do the same thing.
We were talking just now about how Ghana was going to grow. What about the energy infrastructure, the energy situation here? That's been problematic, hasn't it? What are you planning to do to try and work on that? Now,
the energy sector debt this government has piled alone is almost $2 billion. And so if you can imagine that you're taking a bailout for 3 years of $3 billion, and already you've piled a debt of $2 billion. I don't know why that was not factored into the negotiations with the IMF, because it can total everything that this current program is doing. And so when we win and we sit with the IMF, well, let's not collapse.
Well, let's go back to people, away from projects and back to people, young people in particular. There's a big problem with unemployment among young people, isn't there? A brain drain, if you like, people leaving the country to seek opportunities elsewhere, people not finding work here. It's a big issue. What are you planning to do about it?
Before I left office, we held a conference between business and academia. And it was very interesting. The university dons were seated there, and the captains of industry were seated here. And we asked them to have a conversation. And the conversation was, what skills are you looking for as an entrepreneur? What skills are you looking for? And he says, I'm looking for middle-level technical skills. And it was obvious that there was a disconnect between what business was looking for and what we're producing from the schools. We're producing more graduates in certain sectors, MBAs and those kinds of areas. So we need to make a shift. And so one of the things we're going to do is to build more technical and vocational training schools. I've actually said that in every district we must have a modern technical and vocational training school so that more of our young people, even when they leave senior high school, can go and learn a skill. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that total government employees do not exceed 1 million people. And Ghana's population is 33 million people. So it shows that the capacity of government to employ is very limited. And so it means that if we must absorb a lot of these young people, The private sector must be empowered to be able to do that. Unfortunately, we keep paying lip service to the private sector and dumping more taxes on them. The private sector that is known is bearing the brunt of all government's taxes. And so it doesn't give them the opportunity to raise more capital and reinvest. And so we're going to see how we can rationalize those taxes so that it makes it Ghana a more favored destination for investments. We have not exploited our potential in agribusiness. We always encourage the farmers to farm. We give them subsidized fertilizer and all that. Once they harvest, the farmer is left to himself. There's nobody to buy the product and add value to it. And so we're going to change the orientation of the Ministry of Agriculture. It's going to be called the Ministry of Food and Agribusiness, not the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Agribusiness, because we want to emphasize the agro-processing end of the agricultural value chain. And so people will be encouraged to set up factories to buy the excess cassava that we have, produce cassava starch, cassava flour, to buy maize and produce maize flour, to buy soya bean and maize to produce feed for chickens and animals and all that. And so that's an area we're going to look at. Currently, we export raw cashews, and yet it's possible to process those cashews ourselves, brand them Ghanaian cashew, and export them. These cashews are bought raw, taken to India, processed, and shipped to Europe and America. We can short-circuit that and create a direct value chain between Ghana and the markets outside.
I want to touch on ECOWAS, which you mentioned there, and your regional neighbours, and particularly perhaps your neighbours who aren't now in ECOWAS. How do you see Ghana's relationship with them going forward?
I was ECOWAS chairman when we had the problem in Burkina Faso, when President Blaise Compaoré tried to have a third term, extend his term in office, and then there was an uprising, and then there was a coup d'etat. We handled it differently from the way the recent ones were handled. You always give a threat of sanctions, but you don't really impose sanctions. And so I think that we should adopt that strategy of courting them, bringing them back, sharing intelligence with them in terms of the fight against terrorism, assisting them. The ultimate might even to have a multinational joint task force to be able to, fight this Islamic jihadists. We've done it before.
We haven't talked much about you personally. Of course, you have been president before. Probably fair to say nobody could be president without coming in for some criticism. You did face some, particularly over your leadership style. What would you do differently, if anything?
One thing after reflection over being in opposition for 8 years is that we must continue to do infrastructure because it helps with productivity and it helps to grow the economy. But we must also look at the issue of livelihoods and how we can help people to grow their businesses, set up businesses. I think we focus too much on infrastructure at the expense of livelihoods, and so we're going to look at livelihoods. One is our program to empower women's businesses, and that's why we're suggesting the National Women's Development Bank, which would target 200,000 women every year, 200,000 women's businesses every year, and give them small loans without collateral, low interest, to try to grow their businesses.
You're talking about people's livelihoods. We talked already about the high cost of living. One of the effects of that, if you like, has been an increase in illegal mining. That's something the current government's promised to deal with. What would you do to try and tackle it?
Actually, the current president put his job on the line. If he failed to deal with it, then I'd expected that he would resign because he's failed completely. And one of the major things that is making it difficult to fight illegal mining is that it is the appointees of the president are themselves involved in illegal mining, and so there's no will to actually stop it. They have a saying, "Party here sika." It means the party needs money, and so because of that, all of them plunged into small-scale mining, illegal small-scale mining, And so their district chief executives, their party executives, all of them are into it. And so there's no political will.
You have said, we've talked a bit about why this is, Ghana's heading in the wrong direction and needs to be rescued. I wonder if you could tell us why you think it should be you.
When a country is at war and winning that war is critical, in times of crisis, retired generals are called back to come and fight. And so this is the time for retired generals. I'd have loved to stay in retirement, but in Ghana, I am arguably the most experienced person when it comes to all level of politics. I've served in every capacity up to the presidency, and I'm a very practical person. I think that the nation is in a crisis, and I have benefited from my nation. It's made me who I am, and if the time comes to give back, then there's no reason why I should shy away. I believe I can make the right selection of people, and with the experience that I had governing this country, I think there are some things that we can do that will turn things around as quickly as possible. Aside from that, I have young children growing up, and I owe it to them as a duty that we make our country better so that they can have a brighter future. And it's not only for my kids, but for all Ghanaian children growing up. I think that we owe them a duty to make things better. And so that's why I'm offering myself. And I do think that I'm going to give it my best shot. I'm going to give it my all. My purpose for going back into office is to establish a legacy. And once I do that, to hand over to the next generation and go to my farm.
It is time for Africans to hold their leaders accountable and collectively remove all hypocrites with selfish ambitions, which may eventually drive the continent into the bottom of the gutter. Bola Ahmed Tinubu, John Mahama, and the rest of you leaders in Africa are now under the watchful eyes of your people. Kindly support this channel with your like, subscription, and notification to get exciting contents like this.